You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side.
God bless America. Welcome to The Ranch, everybody, the podcast where we explore the people and happenings of Dry Creek Ranch, Eagle, and the greater Boise area. My boy Luke McDonough and I did our first food review at the Spring House over in Hidden Springs, and it was fantastic. That episode will drop next week, and I have a lot of other guests coming on that are going to be awesome. But my guest for this week was also awesome. He's a DCR local, father of two, awesome guy, and also one of the founding members of Key Renter Boise. I had a great time chatting real estate with him, and also chatting about a lot of other things that I had no idea we were going to talk about, which is usually the case. But he is one of the many DCR small businesses. I really enjoyed hearing about what he does, how he does it, and he and his partners did want to extend an offer to the DCR community as well, so that's great. But I'll let you get into it. It was a fantastic conversation. Again, I very much enjoyed it. Without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, Kyle Frederickson. Cheers, sir.
Cheers.
Look at you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming, man. It's a rarity that I get to commiserate with somebody about the atrocities of managing real estate over COVID.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Luckily, Idaho has different rules, and they're more on the owner's side, so it's a lot easier to manage. And people seem generally happier here, so people want to stay and not get kicked out.
Yeah, but I don't think a lot of people understand what it means when it's like, most people are not landlords, right? Most people are not landlords that are in property management, because you can own, like a portion of a REIT, real estate investment trust or something like that. Right. And people are like, oh yeah, I'm a property owner. It's like, you own 10% of something. Like right. You've never even seen the property. Yeah. But when people actually get into rentals and start managing themselves, you see a different world of real estate. You see a different world of housing. For instance, I was talking to a gal just down the street today. She moved from Oakland, and I've spoken with this woman a couple times, and recently she told me, like, oh yeah, I have this property that I'm renting that's a rental in Oakland, and I got to get out of there. I was like, well, what's going on? Because I also have property in Oakland. I know it's not super friendly, but right. There are nuances to it. So yeah. One of the interesting aspects of Oakland that they're bringing up is that tenants get first right of refusal when you want to sell. So let's be clear on this. Let's say you, Kyle, you own a property right. in Oakland, and you're like, I don't need the rental income, or like I need the capital more than I need the rental income, or it's just not working for me anymore. I would like to sell the property. Let's say it's a single family home. The tenant actually gets a certain portion of time, I think it's like 6 months, where they get to decide whether or not they want to purchase it. And if it's too expensive, they can bring in a third-party appraiser and try to beat you up on the price and get the price walked down, even though the market may bear a higher price. Yeah. Like if you put it on the open market, you frequently see appraisals that don't necessarily come in at purchase price. Right. But naturally, the person's like, I don't care if the appraisal says $900, it's worth $950 to me, yeah. So I will pay the extra $50. Right. And it's very much like you don't own your own property anymore.
Well, and they wonder why that people are leaving and not wanting to invest there. It's who would sign up for that? Like, oh, yeah, you're going to own this house, but it's ultimately not up to you when you decide to sell. Like, that seems not like a good idea as an investor.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, but I've been in it so long. Like, yeah. I don't even know what I would do. How did you get into properties?
So I actually had a different career for 16 years in manufacturing, and one of my buddies had been a property manager for a long time. Over 25 years, who's actually my business partner. And we kind of always toyed with the idea of, me joining over with him. And when in 2019, when we decided to leave California, it kind of seemed like the perfect opportunity to start. And so we joined forces, and he sold his Key Renter property management in California. Started fresh here, and we're going now. We're 2 months in.
2 months in.
Ripping. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were saying that that's in the San Jose area?
Yeah, it was in San Jose. Yeah, correct. So he had about 200 properties there. But before that, he managed about 5,000. So
5,000.
Yeah.
Where were the 5,000?
They were spread out all over California, actually. They were a big corporate company, a national company.
That's just, like my head just hurts thinking about that.
And a lot of them were big, 500 unit apartment buildings and things like that, where they have a full-time leasing agent and all that. So that was what he was doing. And he, saw the cash flow. He's like, man, I'm doing all the work, but I'm not reaping any of these benefits. I could definitely do this. Yeah. And so 7 years ago, he started Key Renter, Silicon Valley. And so he grew that. And then COVID happened and we're like, we're out. Let's get out of California.
So how long was he trying to manage the properties during COVID? Like, did he have any experience with the essentially rent forbearance where they're like, we'll catch you up later?
Yes. So about 2 years he was managing properties during COVID, and surprisingly had 0 evictions during that whole time period. There was only one tenant that gave him a hard time, and they were both subcontractors for a large company, both making really good money. It involved fruit, their company.
Fruit? Was that a pineapple?
Yeah, was that pineapple? Yes, they make great phones. And they said because of COVID they couldn't pay rent, and they were both making somewhere in the $500,000 a year range.
Man, I had a tenant a few years back that. She was fine. There was no problem with her at all. Yeah. She moved in as a group of 3 people into this property in Oakland. And at some point, 2 of the women moved out and she stayed. I'm like, oh, things must be going well for her because she obviously moved in as a group. And, the rent was kind of designed for these to have 3 people and they're, upward professionals. And then at one point, it was so great. She's like, hey, if you ever want to get out of town, let me know. She was a very nice woman. I'm like, what do you mean get out of town? Like, I have a car. What are you offering me? Yeah. She's like, oh, well, I just bought this awesome vacation house up in Tahoe. And I was like, all right, let me back up. You're under rent control, so obviously I can't increase your rent, too much. Yeah. And Oakland's not quite as bad as Berkeley, but Oakland has nuances that do not make it fun. Right. But she had enough money that she was like, look, I'll just stay here in this rent-controlled apartment and then just start investing and doing whatever I want elsewhere, which just blew me away. It was like, Ruth, how is it that you have enough money to buy, I think the vacation house, she sent me the address and I looked it up as everybody creeps on Zillow.
Yeah, of course.
But it was like $800,000-$900,000. Like you could have just bought your own house, and she had this beautiful, beautiful Tahoe spot on a hill.
Yeah, wow. And that's why it's so important to set, to list your house at market value instead of like, oh, this tenant's really easy, so I'll give them a good price so they stay. But then they're kind of locked in on that pricing, and you can only increase it so much,
Right.
So. Yeah, that's why it's super important. But I'm sure that happens a lot. Like, why would I leave this house? I'm only paying $1,200 a month. Why would I ever leave? It's so cheap.
Yeah, there are nuances, just as you were saying. There are nuances to behavior that people really don't understand. Right. And I'm not just talking about a simple like, oh, I can't give you the house for free because I have to, pay my mortgage. That's simple.
Right.
But there are nuances in the way of, for instance, setting the rent. Right. If you're living in a place that has rent restrictions or rent control proper, it's very, very tricky because even if you want to give somebody a break, you absolutely cannot. Because what happens is if you give them a break, then they're, like you're pointing out, locked into that. Right. And once people are locked into sub-market rent, a lot of bad things happen. Not just for you, the landlord. Like if people are locked into sub-market rent, say the apartment could rent for $2,000, but they have it for like $1,300, right? Whatever the numbers may be. Sure. They know they can't move without having to make up that $700 a month, which is obviously $8,400 a year. That's a big chunk of change. Huge, and if they're renting, it's after-tax dollars. So it's like $12,000, right? So you have to make an extra $1,000 a month to accommodate for that rent differential. Right. Because of that, they're getting paid to stay where they are. They're essentially getting subsidized $1,000 a month by you or whatever governing body has decided they can't improve the rent. So they stay in situations they would not otherwise stay in. Right. If this person is paying market rent, then they get to decide like, okay, do I actually want to stay here? Is this home suiting my needs? And a lot of times, if the answer is no, then they're like, well, I'm going to get out of here. I'm not going to pay, $2,000 a month to stay here. But if somebody's getting that extra money, that extra $1,000 pre-tax, then they're going to stay in places where like, I don't even like it here. I don't like the neighbors. I don't like the landlord. And they're just going to be pissed. Right. They're going to be mad like the whole time they're living there.
And that's the last thing you want is a tenant that is not happy.
Yeah.
It makes everybody's job harder, whether you use a property manager or you're managing it yourself. If you keep your tenant happy, they're going to take better care of the house. They're going to, they're prideful of it. Right. Whereas if they're just like, oh, it's only $1,000 a month, like don't worry about that. Just let it go. They don't take any pride in it.
Yeah, I'm actually friends with the president of the Berkeley Property Zone Association. This guy Mark, right?
Yeah.
He's like a wizard with real estate because he started purchasing when he was I think he was like 28. So he's this younger guy, moves from Maryland, and just starts buying, don't want them's.
Yeah.
So people that are, stage of life are just like, hey, look, I have this house. I don't want it anymore. Like, whatever. Yeah. Usually run down a lot of deferred maintenance and whatnot. So he starts buying these fixtures and whatnot. Not a lot of money. He was buying them for like $40,000 or $50,000. Yeah. Of course, the same house now is like $800 or $1 million. It's like an astronomical price. But he realized very quickly on exactly what you were saying that, hey, look, you have to keep people happy. So what he was actually doing is he found a way. He was like, look, you need a goodwill item. And like, it's different for everyone. I don't know what your goodwill item is, but you absolutely need it. And he was giving me this recommendation, not just as a property owner, but as a business. He's like, look, most successful businesses take 2 to 3% of their gross, and they use it as goodwill. Yeah. For instance, Ben and Jerry's donates a certain portion, and that was part of their success. And then the late Bear Stearns Investing Bank, they required that all of their partners donate, I think, like 5% of their commissions.
Yeah.
So he was like, look, if you're not doing that for your properties, you're really putting yourself in a bad situation because you will not, there's in the absence of goodwill items, there's really no way to make people happy about paying for something they already have, which is your apartment. Like nobody wants to pay money for something they're already living in. They're like, oh God. Like, I'll pay money for something new, like a new loaf of bread or something. But literally, I have to pay you money just to stay here. There's a psychological issue there.
For sure.
Yeah. So he spent, I think, $4,000 or $5,000 a year on chocolate. Wow. He would buy raw, like dark chocolate chips and make dark chocolate, milk chocolate, white chocolate, like all this stuff, and he'd give it away to his tenants. So it was like thousands of pounds of chocolate a year, which is
yeah. Oh, that's a good idea. We do something not chocolate, but we obviously, I feel like the ultimate goal for everybody is to own property at some point, if they're renting or not. But one thing we do is so we have our real estate license not to sell real estate, but to accept referral or real estate agents will give us some of their commission if we refer them business.
Yeah, sure.
And if one of our tenants is moving out to buy their own house, we actually give them $5,000 towards their down payment of their house if they use our agent.
That's bonkers, man.
So just kind of as an incentive, like, hey, we're going to take care of you, like you're the tenant, right. And we're going to, whether you're renting with us or not, or if you're going on to better places to buy, we're going to help you out.
So you guys get a certain referral, and then you give the tenant a portion of that.
Yep.
Man, that's such a great thing to do.
Because, I think that property management sometimes gets a bad rap of, being like a used car salesman, just trying to collect fees and fees and fees.
Well, you're a terrible person, of course.
Yeah, no, the worst. Yeah, definitely. But so that's something that we kind of do just to kind of help people along. Buying a house is a big deal, and the cost of everything is just going up, and now interest rates and all that stuff. We want to do what we can because we are, we started this business to do good for people, business owners and tenants, and have something that we could be proud to pass to our kids. And helping other people is a huge part of that.
So
the giver's game.
The giver's game. That's a good way to put it. So you guys were initially in, again, NorCal.
Yep.
What are some of the biggest differences you've seen here? And I'll preface this with, I spoke with a tenant last night.
Okay.
Right. I manage this property downtown. It's a group of college students, and I get this funny text message, right? I get a phone call first, and I text them back immediately, hey, I'm at dinner. Can I, what's going on? He's like, can you just call me? I was like, call you? Yeah, like, I'll call you, but like, can't you just text me? He's like, well, there's something, I need to talk to you kind of on the phone about this. And I'm like, oh, no, I wonder if something happened, right? And you might get an instance, where somebody's sick in their family, and they're like, hey, I didn't want to text this, like, my mom's sick or something, like, we need to adjust something.
Yeah.
Fine, so I call the guy. I was like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, all right, so here's the deal. We need an emotional service animal. And I was like, a what? And he was like, we need one of the guys in the house. He's running with 5 guys. He's like, one of the guys qualifies for an emotional service animal. I was like, okay, back up. Is it you? And he was like, no, it's not me. I was like, wait, who? And then I was like, okay, you realize an emotional service animal isn't even a thing. Like you have a service animal that is protected by the ADA, and it's like somebody's blind or they have epilepsy. It's like you get a service animal. These are highly trained, very expensive animals that you obviously need, right? And you have allergy animals and things like that. And then you have an emotional support dog, right? Which is not protected under the ADA because if it's just you being happy, that's not like a disability, right?
Isn't that what all dogs are supposed to do? It's like make you happy.
Right. So of course, man's best friend.
Yeah.
So of course I looked this up and it's like, listen, Idaho is a different place. California, you can get away with like turkeys and cows. There's one instance in Berkeley, freedom of religion, right? Especially in Berkeley. This tenant has a cow in the apartment. And the cow is there, and the landlord finds out. Yeah. And the landlord goes over there and is like, hey, you can't have a cow here. What are you doing? And the guy provides, religion and a note from his like guru and, all this stuff. So he goes to the city of Berkeley and says like, hey, city of Berkeley, he has a cow in his apartment. So city of Berkeley shows up, provides the same letter from the guru and, like this the religious doctrine. Yeah. And city of Berkeley guy goes, yeah, I can't do anything. It's, freedom of religion. And so the landlord actually had to go to the county because the Alameda County does not mess around like the city of Berkeley.
Right.
So Alameda County shows up and they're like, hey, you can't have a cow here. And he shows them, letter from the guru, everything. Yeah. He's like, that's nice. You have 30 minutes to remove the cow because the county health officer didn't care at all.
Right.
And the guy's like, but look, this, and, the cow and, my whatever. Yeah. He's like, okay, that's great, but now you have 29 and a half minutes to remove the cow. And again, it's so lenient.
Right.
And here I realized really quickly, even last night, it's like, oh, there are protections here.
Right.
What are the big things you guys have seen?
Well, in California, if you claimed COVID was an issue for you and it was affecting your life, you could just not pay rent for 6 months. The homeowner still had to pay their mortgage, but you as a tenant weren't obligated to do that. So you put, there are some situations where somebody had one investment property and that was it, not somebody who has 30 that's doing great. And if one person doesn't pay, no big deal.
Right.
But they have, we're a family, couple kids, like we have this one investment property, that's it. And tenant's like, COVID, I can't pay. So now they're having to figure out a way to pay 2 mortgage payments until it's over and they figure out there's like government help or whatever. But they were struggling for 6 months to squeeze by just to pay that second mortgage. And California was like, but the tenant's protected, not the homeowner.
Man, and what if the actual landlord is struggling? Like, what if the landlord's affected by COVID?
Right. They don't care. The bank can take the house.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like the priorities are straight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were forbearance programs for landlords and stuff. I mean, there were some kind of assistances.
It just would take a while.
Yes, right.
Because everybody was in line for it.
Right. Right. And the tenant gets to not pay the mortgage right away.
Yeah.
And if the landlord decides that they're not going to pay, or excuse me, the tenant could not pay the rent right away instantaneously, but the landlord has to go through this like laborious thing, and they may have lost their job. I mean, over COVID, I had a tutoring company which I had since 2004 that completely imploded. Right. So I had these tenant groups that were coming to me, and again, I'm not like a big time landlord or anything. But, I had one specific tenant group that came to me, and college students, and they collectively bargained with me. I was like, what are you guys doing? And again, Berkeley students, so they're bright enough. Yeah. And so they're like, no, we're going to negotiate together. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is insane. They're like, we want a 50% rent reduction. I was like, oh my God, like that's pretty much what happened to me. I was like, are you nuts? Yeah. Like, I can't, like my profit margin is not 50%. Yeah. It's a crazy thing.
They probably looked up the rules, what they were allowed to do, and they knew that they were protected, right? So they're like, either give us a discount or we're just not going to pay, and then we'll still get to live here anyways.
Right. And man, it's a tough thing. So why did you guys get into properties up here then? I mean, it's quite a headache in California.
Yeah, Idaho has a different set of rules, just like everything else. They're really focused on the owners and protecting the owners, and it's just more fair. If you don't pay your rent, you can get kicked out. It's very simple. We obviously work with our tenants first. If it's some dire emergency or whatever, we'll talk to. It's not just going to be all of a sudden 30 days you're out. We'll work it out, but you're allowed to make moves like that here. And just in general, like I was saying before, is that people are generally happier here, whether it be homeowners or renters. They just seem to have a better attitude because the quality of life is better. People are in a better mood and want to stay.
Yeah, there is definitely an aspect of animosity.
Yeah.
Right. Like in the Bay Area in general, there is not happy sentiment towards the landlord. I don't think anybody likes. Like, you go anywhere in the country, I don't think anybody likes the landlord,
right,
or the management company. But that doesn't mean that you have to have a bad relationship with them.
Right.
Yeah, man, it's a thing. Do you guys mess around with like Airbnb style vacation rentals?
Not yet. It takes a different team, or like a bigger team to do that,
right,
just because the turnover is so so fast. You have a cleaning company basically on call 24/7, and if that person bails and you have a renter the next day, you better be prepared to go to the house and clean it yourself.
Get your mop, son.
Yeah, and and it's the percentages are great. A lot of these Airbnb companies charge 30-35%, which sounds great on paper. You're like, oh, like, why wouldn't everybody just do an Airbnb? The part that they don't tell you is the 35% off the top, right? And then there's the cleaning fees, and not to mention how often you can have it rented. So if you're going to make all this money, you think, but you're only renting it 10 days a month, you're probably about the same as renting it long term, except that there's a lot more phone calls, a lot more headache. So we're just staying out of it right now. Not to say that it won't happen in the future when we grow, but for right now, this is manageable, and we can take care of everybody really well.
Yeah, the push towards Airbnb and the allure of having that high return, it's in my mind, it's really short-sighted, and it's not something that I think is advisable for most people, because
right,
like the average person, right? Say they have a vacation house or something.
Yep.
The average person who's like, hey, I have this property that I can rent, or they're just thinking like, oh, I'll snag this small place and rent it. What goes into, like you're saying, what goes into an Airbnb? Not just the cleaning, right? But it's the staging, right? You have to find durable furniture that's not going to become a problem.
Yep.
Excuse me. You have to take into account that you're going to have long periods of vacancy. And I don't think people really ask the question initially, which is like, why would anybody even want to be here?
Right.
Like, what's the draw bringing people to this specific location,
right,
and why would they pay top dollar for it? All people see is like, oh, I could get $200 a night or $300 a night. They start, counting. They're like, that's $9,000 a month. It's like, well, not if you have, like 40-50% vacancy. Like,
right.
That's a lot less. And then, if you are making $4,500 gross, you're paying all the utilities. And by the way, if you're spending the night or a couple nights somewhere and it's hot, you're going to be running that AC at like 68. So the utilities are actually quite significant.
For sure.
Compared to a long-term rental, which you generally don't cover those utilities. So,
right.
Yeah, the popularity of the Airbnb movement, especially off of like social media accounts, and they're like, yeah, it's awesome, I'm making all this money. It's like, those are people that are just trying to get you to watch their videos.
For sure. And I think that if you have an Airbnb that's a destination, I'm sure a lot of the rentals in McCall do really well, or lakefront properties, things like that. I'm sure they crush it because they can charge a premium. But for those in the middle of Meridian, which is great, like, it's a great place to live, but if you're just, we're looking to move to Idaho, let's look for a place to stay. The Holiday Inn is $200 a night, or we could get this house that has a washer and dryer, same price. You have a backyard, a little bit of barbecue. Like, obviously that's a great choice, but what's going to set yours apart if there's 5 within a 1 mile radius? It's going to be price.
Right.
And so, it's going to be hard to make it super unique to where it's like, oh, this is the house. This is the only one that I want to rent. It's not really your house. There's probably a few like it within a close area, and whoever has the lowest price is going to win.
Right. People were. I've been speaking with some people recently about furnished rentals. Right. So we have a furnished rental in the area, and I think it's a really important thing, especially for like any Dry Creek Ranch resident that is building, right? So we actually purchased our house about 2 months before it was done. So we didn't have this long lag period where it was like, we picked a lot and then we built and it took forever.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to suffer through that. But there are a lot of people who want to move here and get on with their lives and start enjoying the awesome aspects of, DCR and whatnot.
It's the best, yeah.
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah.
Like, this is the best place ever.
I feel like it's almost like when I was a kid growing up. There was always kids out in the street playing. You get home from school, you go play till the street lights come on, then it's time to go home, have dinner, right? And that's was sort of disappeared in California. You know, Christmas Day, you look around, it's a ghost town, nobody's out. If your kids want to play out front, you're sitting out there watching them, you know, like, oh, nope, turn around. That's 5 houses down the street. That's too far. Turn around.
Exact same thing. 5 houses down. When you get to that red car, you got to turn around
and come back. And it's sad. You know, it's like you don't want to be a helicopter parent. You want to let your kids have some freedom. But when it involves like their actual safety, you're like, I'm gonna be a helicopter because I'm not sure what's going to happen. Whereas here, there's so many kids. All the kids have each other's back. All the parents know who their kids are with. And so it's a quick phone call like, hey, your kid's over here. Or, hey, I saw your kid ride by. I know that you don't want them going, you know, past Brookside or whatever. Everybody has each other's back. It's like an actual community of people that care about each other.
What do you think happened in California that drove it away from that? Because I grew up in NorCal as well. Right. I grew up in a little town called Concord.
Yeah.
Went to Berkeley and then lived in Danville.
Yep.
What do you think happened to California that really separate? Because you, like you're pointing out, you still have like 1980s California right here. Right. And like Idaho went through the 80s and 90s just like California, but California seemed, especially in Silicon Valley area, seemed to split like away from the rest of the country as far as just really odd habits.
Yeah. So, you know, a lot of fear mongering, you know, a lot of the social media news, like all you hear is bad. Like this person shot, this person kidnapped, all that. It just created this fear bubble. And, you know, it started happening in small towns. You're like, oh, this would never happen here. And it would happen in a small town. And so it made people paranoid and everybody just sort of kept their kids close. And like I said, you know, the best part about one of the advantages of DCR is we're kind of off in our own little bubble out here. Not that the kids like couldn't go outside of it, but it seems more protected, you know, it's just safer because unless you live here, you really have no reason to come in here.
Right.
But I think that a lot of Idaho is still that way. You still go in neighborhoods off of busy streets and there's kids everywhere, you know? So I'm not sure what made California shift to going away from that, but it's really sad. And I'm thankful that I moved out when my kids were young enough to like see what life can be.
Yeah, right. My kids are obviously young enough as well.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. But the fear mongering thing. There's this really funny meme. This one just nailed it, right? So it's this picture of this waterfall with this little lake at the bottom of the waterfall, right? And there was text on it. It's like somewhere there's some poor guy watching this waterfall in the lake, completely unaware of all the things he should be horrified of.
Right. Yeah.
It's
true.
He doesn't even know
Yeah.
he needs to be anxious and terrified about all of these happenings
Right.
in the world. And especially with Northern California, like all the power outages they're having now.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. It's about that time of season.
Yeah.
The rolling blackouts.
Right. The rolling blackouts, the astronomical cost of electricity.
Yeah.
My buddy who lives in Sacramento, I think he works for CHP still, but
Yeah.
he gets this text that's like this text from, you know, some whatever the utility company is up there, and it's green, so you know it's not like a person. It's like flex your power, you know.
Yeah.
Remember, don't use the dryer until nighttime. All this stuff, right?
Yep.
And so he texts back. He knows he's texting back into the abyss. There's nobody who's ever going to read this text. He just texted it for his own sanity. And he's like, "What a joke! You're the 5th largest economy in the entire world, and I can't even run my dryer until nighttime." And he continued on. He's like, "And here you want everyone to go electric cars." He's like, "We can't even run our air conditioners and dryers, like these basic functions, and you want everybody to start buying Teslas and Nissan Leafs.
Right.
Like, what are you doing?"
Yeah. Nobody. Well, it's like it's the beginning of everybody can work from home, but you have no power to run your computer. But okay, now you go in the office. Well, your power shut off, so your car can't get you to work, so you're just stuck.
Yeah, dude, it's so brutal.
Yeah,
it's so brutal. Did you have an electric car in California?
No, I have a truck and I have a Camaro with 550 horsepower.
Look at you dog! My God, I had a Prius. I'm that awesome,
okay.
right?
Yeah,
so for a long time, I did
we had a good run. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and that's it, everybody. Thank you. We had I did all in-home SAT tutoring for years. Okay, so I was driving all over the place. Sure. So the Prius, it was like, look, I don't care about cars. I'm just going to get this Prius. I'm going to go to these people's houses, do the tutoring, go home.
Yep.
And then Trump actually passed a law, I think it was like 2017, which changed the way you could deduct vehicles on your taxes. So if you had something that was a luxury vehicle, you could deduct it at an accelerated rate, and you got, with the Teslas, you got tax credits and everything.
Yep.
So I was like, I crunched all these numbers and I sent them to my CPA because I was like, double check me on this.
Yeah.
Ran through all the numbers and it's like, yep, owning a Tesla will cost the exact same as your Prius. It's like done and done.
Yeah.
Right. So
way cooler.
Yeah. Super cool. And we had the rear facing back seats, like the station wagons from the 80s.
Those are the best.
Those are the best. Not the best if you get rear ended, as I come to find out. Like there's a reason why they kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
Because if you have a station wagon that has the rear facing seats and, little Johnny's back there and some truck that's jacked up runs into the back, it's lights out. So I didn't realize that beforehand.
And it's super distracting for the driver behind you, right? So you're like, I remember as a kid sitting back there, and you're like waving, making faces, and they're looking at you, not ahead. I'm like, that was probably really dangerous. It's probably more random because of that.
We started writing notes on pieces of paper, and we'd hold the notes up to the window. And what were we doing? That was like the original texting from cars. Like we had a Sharpie and some, and we just slap it on the window.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm like, this is awesome, right? Like I have a 7-seater sedan. It's great. Yeah. But it was not great. Like the car was okay. But first off, the problem with the air conditioning is that the air conditioning in the back, there are no vents for the back, right? So you are literally in direct sunlight, and the AC doesn't get to your kids. So Tesla in the original versions of the S with the rear seats, they actually installed fans back there because they had these fans you could clip on because kids were getting like roasted to death. Right. So you had to tint it out. And there were just all these problems with it. And ultimately it was like, look, I'm trapped. Right. Like, even though I had one that had like 260 miles of range, it was like one more layer of anxiety living in California. Yep. Like you couldn't just jump in the car and drive you couldn't just drive to Tahoe on a whim. Like you had to charge all the way to the full and like you had to worry about it. And then did you ever see the issues on I-5 at Thanksgiving?
No.
Oh, dude. So people would go on like Thanksgiving, day before or day of, travel down to loved ones in other areas. Well, on the I-5, there are only a few charging stations. Right. So all of a sudden you have these cars stopping that are trying to charge for like 45 minutes. Right. And, whereas you're at a gas station, you got to wait like 3 minutes if everything's full. There, you got to wait 45 minutes. And so all of a sudden there was this monster parking lot of Teslas. People were like missing Thanksgiving dinner and stuff.
Yeah.
It was,
and they have no choice.
They have no choice.
Yeah.
They have no choice. But again, it's that type of anxiety, right? Not enough power even to run basic operations. Sure. And then anxiety when you are running it about the price, right? Because if you run your AC, you're like, forget it. I don't care about the blackouts. Here comes $1,000 electrical bill. Yep. It's just... And then everything else that goes along with it. Anxiety about the environment, anxiety about fires, anxiety about this, anxiety... It's like... Oh, too much stress, man.
Yeah, and then when you add,
let's get this bad boy a little closer to you.
Oh yeah, when you add, all the COVID stuff with, masks. Like if you didn't wear a mask, all of a sudden you're an anti-masker, or it divided it even further. And it's a bummer. And the joke of it too, you drive by the Tesla factory, which used to be the NUMMI plant in Fremont, and there's smokestacks all over that thing with black smoke coming out of it. You're like, oh, seems way better for the environment. Like, at least the environmental impact.
That's not a steam chimney.
Yeah.
That's black smoke.
People just cared more about their image. Like, the environmental impact isn't on me directly. Yes, they use coal to make this car, but I didn't do it.
They use coal to make the car, and they use coal to charge the car.
Right.
Like, it's a less efficient.
Yeah. Right. And then they added that, I had a buddy at PG&E, they added the Green Initiative bill onto that, and everybody's like, oh, what is this? They're like, oh, we're using more green power. Do you know where the green power came from? Idaho. So Idaho has one of the highest green energy, water power, solar, and wind out of any state in the United States. And so they are buying power from Idaho, getting it to California, and that's how they were using some green energy. And then Idaho is buying their power from North Dakota, which is coal. So it goes back to California, like, it's not me. I'm buying green energy, and Idaho is buying dirty energy. So I'm doing my part.
Wait. Okay, first off, you kind of blew my mind. Idaho has the highest green energy production.
It's like number 2 in the nation.
How? We only get sun like half the year here.
If you drive north of here, all the dams like in the river have these big propellers in them. There's wind everywhere. They have a lot of that here.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Solar is one of those things. Like I understand hydro, I understand wind.
Right.
And solar is one of those things that it's like everybody wants it to be the solution.
Right.
And it's almost like people are willingly denying the fact that it has these massive shortcomings.
Right.
Like, how are you going to fuel the entire world off of solar energy?
Right.
Just the load shift is almost impossible to effectively do. And even if you have battery systems that are like massive, and every house has, one of the big things that they're developing with cars, electric vehicles, is you can charge your car off of your house. Okay.
Yeah.
And then shift that load. So you're at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, before your house heats up, before you start doing laundry, you can charge your car off of your solar panels.
Right.
And then at night, load shift. So you were dumping all the energy into your car, and now you're taking all the energy out of your car. Well, one of the problems is now your car can't go anywhere. Right? Or your car's at like 50% capacity when you do need to go somewhere.
Right.
Okay. The other problem is to get 100 kilowatts of energy off of solar panels, you have to have the most bonkers system. You do not have enough roof space. It would have taken me something like probably 3 days straight to fuel my car that I just pedaled around town in.
Right.
All the way full. It's like, this is not a viable solution.
Yeah. Well, there was a car company, a smaller one. I think they were called Karma Fisker, and they had solar panels on the roof of this car. And the company ended up going under because the cars were catching on fire or something like that. But
nothing big.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't figure out why, but had solar panels on the roof. And I was like, oh my gosh, a solar car. This is awesome. It actually wasn't that. What it was, it would recharge your car slowly because it had a hybrid battery system. Sure. But it was, they said if your car sat in the sun the entire day, direct sunlight, that solar panel had enough power to run the radio for about 3 hours.
Right. Right. Because of the demand on surface area to get effective solar, like, what was it? They had a version of the Prius that had a solar panel on top.
Okay.
But that would effectively only turn on your AC for 5 minutes to try to cool down your car.
Right.
And that was it. Like, that was all it could do, because you need a roof's worth of solar panels to even get anywhere close to half a battery charge throughout the day. And that's if you're not consuming anything. Right. Because if you are consuming, then you obviously, you take power away from your car battery.
And what's going to be interesting too, and I feel like there hasn't been enough, I know there are some companies that are starting to figure it out, but it's going to take some time, is what's going to happen with all these batteries. Like in Idaho, you can just throw your batteries in the trash. It's fine. But in California, I don't know if you remember, they're like, no battery, you got to take them to a special place to be recycled, this whole process. What's going to happen? A Tesla battery pack is the equivalent to like 10,000 AA batteries.
Yeah. I'm honestly not worried about that. Like the recycling, it's okay. You have to take them to a recycling center. But if you tear down a house, you have to take half of the garbage to a recycling center too. Like you have to separate the drywall from the lumber.
Right.
You have to separate the shingles from the piping. Like we have recycling set up.
Right.
Like where, for instance, Priuses have been around for quite some time.
Yeah.
Do you see mountains of Prius batteries?
No, but they weren't as popular. And now, because the life cycle of these batteries is like 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
When did Prius really start taking off?
Well, even if we say it wasn't until like the mid 2000s,
right?
Like 2010, fine.
Right.
Okay, well, it's been like 12 years since 2010.
So we're getting towards the end of that cycle.
Yeah, but again, just think about the average car.
Right.
Okay, cars have been immensely popular.
Right.
For a long since we had cars.
Yeah.
Do you see mountains of car batteries sitting around?
No.
And let's say that the battery in a Tesla is 100 times larger than the battery in an average car.
Yeah.
Okay, fine, but we've had like 100 times more cars than Teslas for some time. We don't like battery technology to me is not a big deal. Same with solar panels. Mm-hmm. Like solar panels are like 95% recyclable or like 98%. Think about computers. All right, everybody had a computer starting in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
And everybody has TVs. And we even had giant TVs, like monstrous, like projection, flat screens and all the stuff. Where are the mountains of TVs and computers and cell phones?
Well, I think that a lot of the wires and stuff can be recycled. Like the copper can be reused, but I think the lithium in the batteries is the problem. Maybe.
Could be.
I don't know.
Could be. But my point is we have mechanisms to deal with technological waste.
Sure.
Right? So I'm not that.
Yeah.
I mean, like, we'll work it out.
Yeah.
But it's still, like, I'm less worried about what we're going to do at the end of life and more worried about, like, okay, you're requiring that California no longer sells gas vehicles and you can't run washers and dryers right now.
Yeah. That's a
Like,
huge
is
problem.
anybody paying attention to this?
Right. I mean, that's what's crazy too, is like you said, like the cost of it. I mean, we had a 1,400 square foot house in California and our PG&E was $500 a month in the summer.
Dude, right.
And here, you know, it's 30% of that.
Right.
And the house is twice as big.
Oh my God. Yeah, we had a 1,700 square foot house. We had a $60,000 solar setup. So we actually had 2 rounds of solar panels put on our house.
Yeah.
And 2 batteries, 2 power walls
Yeah.
put on the house. And we're like, we got it. And
Yeah.
I was charging it like the supercharger with
Yeah.
the Tesla. And I wasn't driving very much. I was literally driving like, 10 miles a day,
Right.
going down to my SAT classroom in the back.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. Like, we're like, what are we doing? Like, this is, and my bill on a monthly basis was still $150.
Right.
I was like, why did we spend $60,000
Yeah.
for the solar panels?
Yeah. Don't worry. You'll get your money back in 360 years.
But okay, in solar's defense now, imagine having bought solar 5 years ago,
Right.
and then like having 100% increased cost of energy now.
Right.
Like at some point, you do have to realize like somebody's raking in a lot of savings from
Yeah.
the utility companies.
For sure. And I think there's like a problem over in Europe, right? People's utility bills are going to like thousands of dollars a month.
Did you see 2 weeks to flatten the curve?
No.
Oh my God. Oh my, where's my phone? I have to read this to you. So director of the EU said that they're going to do 2 weeks to flatten the curve with utilities. And they're going to attempt to, here it is. EU president calls for mandatory energy rationing to, quote, flatten the curve. So she's literally saying we're going to have mandatory energy rationing, i.e. we're going to come turn off your power throughout the EU during the peak hours in order to, quote, flatten the curve of demand. It's like,
Wow.
why? Why did you say flatten the curve?
I feel like this sounds oddly familiar.
I know my hands started sweating when I read that. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not even
Yeah.
in the EU.
Those exact words? Come on.
Yeah, I have a buddy actually who just moved back from Germany. He moved to Germany in like February 2020. Literally
Yeah.
the month, it was less than a month between when he landed and when they went on lockdown. And Germany went hard lockdown.
Yeah.
And he said he lived next to a forest, private forest. There was all this firewood there, and they're fans of burning firewood in
Yeah.
in Germany, in the area he was in. And he said, why is there so much essentially fuel on the forest floor? And they're like, oh well, it's a private forest, and like we don't really need it, so we don't do anything with it. He says now it's like broom clean. People have chopped down trees,
Yeah.
stockpiled wood, like gone through this forest like a band of weevils. Like they just grabbed every piece of fuel because they know winter's coming.
Yeah. I mean, what are you supposed to do if your power bill goes to $2,000 a month? That's going to bankrupt people. It's crazy. And people complain about what's going on in the United States. It's like, oh, you think there's better options? Look at what's happening here now.
Yeah, right.
It's like it could be worse.
It's self-inflicted too. They shut down, I think, like 2 nuclear power plants in California that were not at risk of exploding or anything. They just shut them down for policy's sake. And Newsom very much wants to appear to be like this green kind of crusader.
Well, nuclear has a buzzword is super negative, right? Everybody thinks like a nuclear plant is like a nuclear bomb plant. It's like no, it's not the same thing.
It's not quite the same thing.
It's not quite the same thing. It's just it's crazy.
Yeah, it's a little wild. Do you guys mess around at all with putting solar on rentals?
We haven't done that yet. I'm sure it's something that's going to come up at some point.
Yeah. I'm sure it's going to be required in California quite soon here.
Oh, 100%. 100% will be required.
But it's like, again, I understand the value of having it.
Right.
But it's like with any other update. It's like if there's no benefit to me,
right?
Why force me to spend this
It's like,
astronomical sum of money?
It's free, but you're going to pay the same bill. You're like, well, why would I do that?
Yeah.
It seems like you're going to be drilling holes in my roof. Like it doesn't. It's not quite. I mean, in my mind, if somebody's like, oh, we're going to put solar on your roof for free, we'll take the average bill and you'll just pay us instead.
Yeah, right.
It's like, well, it sounds like the same. Why would I do that?
Yeah, and again, the argument,
but the bill does go up.
right? The argument is that it's always a moving target because
Right.
PG&E or any utility company can always increase its cost.
Right.
And interesting, the gas bills in California are actually the gas is given to consumers at cost. So the utility companies in Northern California, the gas bills jumped up like 5,000% or something ridiculous, and people got mad and they're like, we should try to put PG&E out of business. They're like, we make $0 off of this. We're literally delivering the gas to you at cost that it costs us. So
Right.
it doesn't. They're like, you can be mad at us, but the next guy's going to have to go through the exact same thing.
Right.
There are too many things wrong with that state. Let's get away from that.
Yeah, right.
Have you guys messed around at all with like self-storage?
No, actually, my father-in-law owned a self-storage facility he bought it in 2001 and sold it 2 years ago in California. That's not something we typically do, because a lot of those places, in my experience through my family, is that there's just there's a manager on site, in case there's issues. So it's not really, there's no tenants. So it doesn't really involve day-to-day things. It's just like, oh, my lock doesn't work, or somebody didn't pay. And then you got to make some phone calls to get them to pay. If they don't, you get rid of their stuff, It's pretty cut and dry.
Their stuff.
He never did that, actually. He would always work out a payment plan. He was a very, very good landlord in that sense. He never did the auctions.
Right. He didn't have the storage wars.
Even the storage wars thing was trending heavy during that time. He didn't do it because he's like, this is people's stuff.
Yeah.
Why would I do that to somebody?
Well, because it's like a 20-year-old TV worth $3.
Right.
Like that's
Right.
why. Like
I had some people who I know that bought storage lockers and nobody ever got anything good. Like that show was like, a 1 in a million shot. And people were like, oh, now I have all these clothes from 1995 and like a broken TV and a couple tennis rackets that need to be restrung. And I just paid $600. Now what do I do?
Yeah, but that's because like reality television is like, it's the farthest thing from reality.
Right.
I mean, reality television is like, how can we take someone's boring ass, like pathetic life and try to make it something that's entertaining?
100%.
And it's like, let's cherry pick the one crazy thing that happened. So like, you just follow them all day long and they're just, this stupid, dumb person who's just like, dun, 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 dun. Then like somebody throws a bean at him from the Human Bean. And it's like, that's the scene where like they get in a fight over the chocolate covered coffee bean.
Yep. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's pretty funny. You're totally right about reality TV being as far away from reality as possible. Yeah. But it is intriguing for some reason. Like why? Like I find myself getting stuck in some marathon of storage wars. I'm like, what am I doing? Of course they're going to find something. They've been filming this for an hour, but
I try to take a step back and look at my life, and so I'm like, all right, look, what's going on in my life so that I lost 2 hours, and this was actually a good way to lose the 2 hours.
Totally. Yeah.
At what point was this a good call?
Right. Never. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. The reason I asked about self-storage is I have a buddy who's he's crushing it with solar RV and boat storage in California.
Yep.
So essentially you have these large open spaces and then you put these solar roofs on them.
Yep.
Go store your RV or go store your boat. It's sunny all year long there.
Yeah.
And he's actually becoming these solar farms so that he gets these subsidies for the solar panels and then makes money on the land with renting on the boats, and then just nets like some astronomical sum of money.
Yeah. So in Idaho, I believe that solar panels that you're using, you can't sell back to the grid. It can only be used for your own solar. Idaho Power will not buy it from you. Whereas PG&E, you could have a solar farm and sell it back to the grid. Idaho doesn't do that.
Yeah, but you also get like pennies on the dollar. Like if there are a lot of different ways to sell it back to the grid. You can actually you can get certified as a power company with solar. But if you're just the average consumer and say like I overgenerate 10 kilowatts, well, if I'm buying the kilowatts for like $50 cents a kilowatt, they'll actually only pay me like 1.5 cents for extra kilowatt usage. The play is always to just zero out your bill.
Right.
It's never actually to do anything. So I guess in Idaho that would work just fine because you're not.
Yeah.
It's like if you zero out your bill, great. But
great. Yeah. Anything over will just roll over into the next month, I guess, if you were over. Yeah.
Yeah, but why? I mean, what's your electric bill? Mine's like $80.
I mean, in the summer, it's been higher, and also we have
like 85?
No, we have a new puppy, so we leave the door open and the AC on, cooling off the neighborhood.
Wait, you leave your back door open?
I don't want to point out fingers, but the door does get left open sometimes, so the dog can go in and out, and so the AC has been constantly running, but it's still less than $200.
Yeah, right.
So it's still half of what my other house was. It's still way better.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, everything, even like look at water, you know, I joke with my friends. I had a friend from California come visit 2 weeks ago, and, you know, it was 106 degrees, and we're driving down Dry Creek Road, and they're watering that big open field. It's 106. I'm like, hey, buddy, look, so that stuff coming out of there is called water. I know you guys used to have it, but we like to water it when it's 106 degrees because we have so much of it.
Yeah. Speaking of like back in the day, 1980 kids, right? We have an open little field, 1/4 acre lot next to our house, and it's maintained by the HOA, and, you know, grass gets mowed and everything. And on the hot days, several times I've just taken my boys out there, thrown a couple hoses at them. I'm like, just go, and they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, pull the trigger on the nozzle and shoot it at your brother. And he's like, and all of a sudden it's like this water fight for hours. Yeah. It's like stuff we used to do back in the day without even thinking about. Right. Now it's just unthinkable.
Oh, yeah. I remember we had the front of our house there sloped down towards the street just because that's how they build houses, so water doesn't go under your house, right?
Right.
And during that whole the beginning of the drought, when we're supposed to like shower with a bucket in there and save the gray, the water from there and reuse that, like, you know.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, and so and so we would water our lawn just to try and keep it kind of alive. And because of the thing called gravity, as I explained to the city worker, it goes downhill, and it would go onto the sidewalk and it'd spill over. And we probably got 3 or 4 letters saying that we were going to be fined for watering the pavement during a drought.
I brought a bucket out of the shower to keep my daffodils alive.
Yeah, exactly. And I angled the sprinklers so tight that they're basically like just spraying one stream, you know, to show them like how much I was not watering the concrete. And then they said, well, we don't care. You got to stop doing that. So I ripped out all of my front lawn and put a fence like halfway down the middle, did just a small garden against the house, and did grapevines in the front because they require very little water once they're established.
Yeah, sure.
And so we had like this small little vineyard in front of our house with a drip, you know, just so we wouldn't get that violation letter again.
Yeah. Did you attempt to make wine?
Yeah. So I actually made some wine, made some brandy, and then
bro, be honest with me. How bad was it?
It was actually really, really good.
You made good wine?
Yes.
How?
So, funny story.
A dude with those glasses and that hair or that hat, right. You can't make wine.
Like, one thing you'll learn about me is that I need to know that I can do everything once. So, whether it be like making sourdough bread, wine, or like learning how to play golf or whatever.
La Croix?
Yeah.
There you go, baby. Exactly. Let's get crazy.
Yeah, it's insane.
This is how I do it. I drink water like it's beer.
Well, now because of the 75 hard, I'm drinking a gallon of water a day. It's ridiculous.
Cheers, sir.
Cheers. Another one.
Explain the 75 hard to me again, because I've heard snippets of it, like the dual workouts every day. Like, what are you doing?
So it's 2 workouts a day. You have to stick to a diet plan. So it doesn't need to be a specific one like paleo or keto or whatever, fasting. It needs to be just a plan. So you can say like, oh, I'm going to do paleo, but I'm going to allow dairy. But you just have to stick to it for 75 days. Then you have to read 10 pages of a book that's going to improve who you are as a person. So if you're a salesperson, you can read a sales book, or you can read the Bible, or I'm reading a parenting.
Wait, why'd you say the salesperson reads the Bible? If it's like
a salesperson can read a sales book, or you could read a Bible as an example.
It's like that's the alternative.
Yeah,
that's the only other book.
Right. Or like I'm reading a parenting book because I feel like I can always improve as a parent.
Wait, is it an old parenting book, or is it a new one?
It's a new one. It's interesting. I'm only 10 pages. We're on day 2, so I'm only 20 pages in.
Okay, well,
but the beginning.
Tell me about it.
The beginning is saying that it's okay that you're not perfect. It's impossible to be perfect. And the prologue at the beginning is just saying, I yell at my kids often.
Yeah, right.
And I sit back in my room going like, why do I yell at them? It's not even a big deal, and that's fine. And that's basically the first part that I've read. Is like. It's normal.
You know why you yell at your kids? So they know it's possible for them to have a negative effect on adults, right? Because it's always like, don't raise your voice. You don't want him to get upset. It's like, no, I want him to know he pissed me off.
Right.
Like, and he pissed me off, and he needs to know that he can have a negative effect on people's emotions if he pushes my buttons 1,000 times over. Like, I'm going to yell a little bit.
Yeah. And it's easy to say like, oh, I'm not tomorrow. I'm going to try to not yell. And then, 4 hours in, after you tell them for the 10th time to brush their teeth, You're like, all right, like you need to brush your teeth, or else I'm gonna have to think of something off the spot. And
Dude, 4 hours in, I don't make it like 3 hours.
Yeah.
Like, forget it, man.
Yeah, especially now with this new diet, I'm extra on edge.
Okay, so you're reading 10 pages of the Bible or something else a day.
Whatever you want. Yeah,
Whatever you want.
10
Right,
pages of some sort of improvement book.
Okay.
Yeah, so you have the workout, reading, diet plan. You have to take a photo of yourself every day to see improvement.
Like a selfie?
A selfie.
As part of
a full body as part of it.
The narcissism is part of this? Like, what are you doing?
To see your progression, I guess, is the whole point.
Oh, that's very exciting.
One of the workouts has to be outside.
Okay.
Which is going to get interesting in the winter.
It's not that big of a deal. Go running, bro.
Well, when it's 20, it's not that fun.
I actually, when I moved here, it was I moved in January, and I started doing runs outside in T-shirts and shorts. It's like I would put gloves on because I got pretty bad circulation, so my hands would always get really painful and cold. Sure. But I just go running in the dark.
Yeah. Like
9 o'clock at night with a flashlight and these gloves on. And dude, it was great.
Yeah, there is something very peaceful about the cold. We did a couple mountain bike rides in the dead of winter, and it was 21 degrees. It was actually me, my buddy, and my father-in-law, and we drove down to Melba, which is like an hour south of here, and we get to this parking lot. There's nobody out there, obviously, because it's 21 degrees, and it's a mountain biking trail, and my father-in-law goes to hit his dropper post to raise up the seat, and the cable just snaps, and he's like, well, I guess my ride is over, because the seat was on the spring, and so he ended up leaving, and my buddy and I rode, and we rode for about an hour, and we're about 6 miles in, and I'm like, dude, can you feel your feet? And he's like, yeah, I think so. And he goes to put his foot on the ground. He's like, nope, definitely not. I'm like, yeah, me either. So we like hightail it back down. I was like, I'm not sure how long it takes for hypothermia to kick in, but we got to be close.
Yeah. And the hypothermia actually is not as big of a thing as when your core is warm and you're fine, like you can lose your extremities, feeling and whatnot. Yeah. That's not as big of a deal. Sure. But when your body starts heating those back up once you're in the car, that's when you're in for it. Because your hands and feet become these like ice blocks, right? And your core body temperature is fine. You're like, I'm nice and strong, right? Yeah. Like I'm not worried about it. Yeah. But when you start circulating the blood back through your hands, they're like literally ice blocks. So your veins are just pumping this freezing cold blood back to your heart.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so that's why a lot of times when people are doing cold activities like mountain biking, they make it through the actual activity. Yeah. And then when you have the come down, when you're in your car, all of a sudden you start like shaking and you're like, oh my God. Yeah. So that's why I always wear, that's why I would do the gloves. Yep. It's like, let's just keep my hands all right. Sure. And then, everything else is going to be okay.
We basically wore snow gloves while we were riding and snow boots.
Yeah.
It was a fun experience, but it's so quiet. Like you said, like running in winter, like I have some video of us riding and it's just, you don't hear a thing. All you hear is like the tire going through the dirt. It's really peaceful.
Yeah. Were you here in, I think it was February when it started dumping? It was like the end of January.
Oh yeah.
Dude, the silence when you would walk outside.
Oh, it's the best.
Just deafening. It was just, man, it was wild.
Yeah, I would just find myself like standing in my garage with my coffee, looking outside, going, "Oh my!" Like just like listening because it's so quiet. And also, like as a parent, there's so little quiet in my life. Whenever I get it, I'm like, "Oh, this is nice.
This is not bad.
This is great."
I have this fantasy of standing outside with like a cup of coffee and like just taking in the snow and stuff.
Yeah.
But every time I try to do that, it's like. One, every time I'm standing outside, like you're saying, like my kids run out, they're like, Dad, what are you doing? It's cold out here. I'm like, oh, you ruined it. Yep. And my coffee gets cold really fast. Mm-hmm. My wife actually bought me this plug-in coffee mug a couple years back. And man, I was like, I don't want to, like, what a weird thing. It's
just
got
run
like
an extension cord to your coffee cup?
It was a USB plug, right? And you couldn't, there was a portion of it that you couldn't put into the dishwasher because it was obviously electric and electrical stuff. And I don't know, I was just like, this is too goofy. I'd rather have like a boiling hot cup of coffee in a coffee mug that has like a lot of thermal mass. Get that bad boy real hot. Like microwave it till you can't hold it. Right. Put a glove like an oven glove on and then stand outside and like burn your face off as you drink it.
Yeah, exactly. Let it be peaceful.
Hashtag life goals.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying that in December for sure.
Hey, let's do it, man. We'll go on a long run in the cold or you could do a bike ride. I used to actually kayak in Alaska. My dad lives up there.
Oh, nice.
And there were these glacial rivers. So the water was really only like 35 degrees.
Yeah.
And after 2 hours of being in this kayak, you and the kayak are like, there's only this big of a barrier between you and the water.
Right.
Like the kayak's just a little piece of plastic.
Yep.
Like it's thick plastic, but it's only,
Right.
like 5-6 millimeters.
Right.
Anyway, so you get done and your feet are absolutely frozen. They've been rammed in. You have to point your toes. Sometimes they have pads where you put your feet against, but I have pretty long legs, so I'd have to kind of point my toes down into the front of the kayak. Dude, they were just these stiff, broken, frozen blocks of hatred.
Yeah.
I'd get out. I'm like, I can't walk.
Yeah.
Not a fan of that.
Well, if somebody, I think it was our real estate agent when we first moved here, he's like, just remember that it's not that cold. There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes.
That's fair.
And that stuck with me. I'm like, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Because you can be comfortable in most environments if you're dressed properly. But there's some that you can't avoid.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, actually, because, my dad living up in Anchorage, he would always tell us, he's like, the only reason you're cold is because you didn't put on the second jacket. We're like, Dad, one jacket is enough. He's like, or it's not.
Yeah.
Maybe one jacket's not enough. Like, you just put on the jacket, you're going to be fine. But if you don't, it's going to be a real problem.
For sure.
And that obviously stuck with me moving up here. He sent me and my wife like all these tips about different gloves to get, and like he's like, get a gajillion throwaway gloves.
Yep.
Get sweats that are 2 sizes too big, and just put the sweats directly over the jeans if it gets too cold. Like all these things. He's like, because you can't live inside the whole time,
right?
And especially being in Alaska, they have really limited sunlight in the winter.
Right.
So he was really savvy about ways to get kids out of the house. He adopted 7 kids after me. So he had like this whole house of kids running around. He had to get them outside in the snow with like the moose and stuff.
Yeah. Well, one thing I noticed living here too for, now 2 years is that your, what you used to call cold is a totally different number now. Like if you're in December and there's a sunny day and it's 43 degrees, I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt outside. And I'm like, this is beautiful. This is amazing. But in California, when it was 60, you're like, oh, get the sweatshirt. It's cold.
Yeah, I think there's something having to do with the humidity. So like if you live, it's very, very dry. So when we moved up here in, again, January, hit the park a couple times and it was like 34 degrees or something. Yep. And I literally just had a t-shirt on. I was like, this is totally tolerable. Yep. Like maybe it's a little cold, but if the sun is out, I don't care at all.
Right.
It's when it's like 33 and then the sun goes away and you're like, all right, where's my sweater? Any wind, you're just running for it. Yeah. Tell me about the rental market up here, because obviously things were hot as could be for some time.
Right.
But there are two minds when the housing market takes a little bit of a tank.
Right.
One mind is that, hey, people need to live somewhere, okay? Right. And you're not going to stop people from moving to this area because this area is awesome, right? So if fewer people are buying houses, but you have the same pool of people moving up here, you're going to see strong rents, okay? But the other mind is, you will, but there are a lot of houses coming on the market, and there are also a lot of like apartment complexes and places for rent.
Right.
So what are you guys seeing as far as what rents are actually doing?
So the rents, a lot of people come to us, ask us to rent their house out, and they give us this astronomical number of what they want.
$10,000.
Nobody's buying houses right now. Interest rates are insane. Like, we're going to make an extra $1,000 a month, and you're like, oh, no. Because a lot of people aren't doing that. So the prices really have stayed kind of the same, maybe gone up a little bit, but we're talking 5% maybe. A lot of the calls that we're getting are from people who've had their house on the market for now 45, 60 days. And they're like, well, my house isn't moving. We're just going to keep on paying the mortgage until maybe somebody buys it,
or you drop the rent,
or you keep on dropping the price, right? And so we're getting a lot of calls like that for people to take over their properties. Like, hey, let's just try to rent it out for a year and see what happens, and maybe the market will come back a little bit and we'll wait. But the rents have stayed the same, but properties are going faster. More people are giving up on the home search for now. They're like, prices are getting better, but they're still high. But the interest rates are still too high. And, the cost of housing has gone up so much here that if your house is, let's just say it's going to be $750,000, if you would have bought that $750,000 house 2 years ago, your mortgage payment has now changed by like $1,200, $1,500 a month just based off the interest rate. And that's not money that you're getting. That's just money that's gone.
Gone.
And so it's a great time to kind of wait it out, I would say. You can rent for a bit. We're doing a lot of 6-month rentals, people want to rent only for 6 months. They're like, oh, the market's going to come back. I'm like, okay, well, a lot of people are doing 6 months at a time. Let's see what happens in 6 months, and we can re-up you in 6 months. But yeah, so that's kind of where it's at right now.
Yeah, and the rents always lag. They lag anyway, and people don't recognize that. Like, housing prices can swing up and down very, very easily,
right.
but rents don't swing. Like, they will swing, but they're not. It's going to, whereas a housing market might crash if within like a matter of weeks.
Sure.
And we saw here, obviously the interest rates jumped up within like 60 days or something. It was like, gun went off.
Right.
And everybody started adjusting to the interest rates. The rents don't do that because of the nature of the agreements. It's like you can only get a rent increase or decrease when somebody leaves, and leases are like years,
right?
In some cases,
yeah. And a lot of times, like when we, one thing that we offer is we do a free like rent analysis, what we think your house will rent for, as one of our services. You're looking at comps in the area. And all those houses have been rented out, like you said, 6 months, a year, or longer.
Right.
So those are the comps. Like, those are accurate numbers of what's actually renting for what price in that area. And you can try to go like, okay, well, it's different time, which I agree. But if the rent average in your area is $2,500, you're not going to all of a sudden get $3,500. We might be able to get $2,650.
Right.
A little bit. Like maybe like whatever that increase would be if somebody moved out. But it's not going to be some crazy 30-40% above market value,
Yeah, but I think until people have been in the market and in the business for some time, I think it is difficult for them to understand that it's like, look, you have an emotional attachment to this house, but for someone else, at least at the onset, it's very much a transaction, right? And they have access to the same information that you have access to, right? Like if there's a $2,500 place in the same neighborhood and you want $3,500 because it's your house and it's so great. Right. Put yourself in their shoes, right? Like you wouldn't rent the $3,500 house, like unless there was something amazing about it.
Yeah.
And very frequently that's just not the case. It's like look, it's not a bad house, and like you have very nice countertops, but like very nice countertops don't account for $500 swing.
For sure, and that's one of the first conversations we have with people is changing their mindset as an owner. Especially if they were living in the house, right? Let's just say they're living there for 5 years. They've now moved out, bought a different house, and now they have this house. They want to rent it out. In their mind, oh, this is my house. Like I've been here for 5 years. Like I love like this wainscoting on the wall. I love the paint color. Like I love all these
molding.
Things. Yeah, I'm like that's great. Like it looks amazing. Right. But this is now your investment property. So think of this house as a business. And they're like, okay, well I don't want pets. You're like, okay, that's fine. Like we can do no pets for sure.
Right. 65%
of renters in Idaho have pets. So we're going to limit right off the bat, 35% of the market. Like, so now you have 35% left of that rental pool against all the other houses that are allowing pets. And so if you look at it as an investment, you're like, hey, I want to cash flow as much as I can. And like, that's how you need to look at it. Right. We always say like, we try to minimize risk, maximize cash flow. And so leaving it open-ended for whoever can get in there, we let our job as the property management company and screening tenants get a good tenant in there for you. And it shouldn't really matter as long as we can maximize the dollars coming in.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole nature of what's valuable for a tenant versus a homeowner is, like you're saying, wainscoting. Like that's very valuable for a homeowner, right? It's like, it's beautiful. I'm going to look at this every single day. But a tenant coming in, it's like, that's not an asset. An asset's like a double oven, right? An asset's like a built-in microwave above the stove. Like those are assets, and they're things that actually generate revenue. Yep. Whereas, again, with the emotional ties, sometimes I had a buddy who's one of my real estate mentors back in California, and he was telling me he did real estate on the side for like 30 years, and then had a brief period of time where he was a broker. He's like, yeah, why not? Like he retired from his main job and he was in real estate. He's like, why not? I'll just do this on the side. Yeah. So he would bring in a stager. And he was telling me about this time when he had the stager who was like, no nonsense. She'd come in, she'd blow through, she'd do a great job with staging, but she was very like, this has to go, like wipe it all clean, right? So she goes into this woman's house and was like, all right, clear out this hallway. Like none of these pictures need to stay. Like I'm going to bring in my own stuff. And the woman who's selling the house, right? Like this is not staging for a rental. She's selling the house. Like she's going to wipe her hands. She's like, okay, but we need to keep this picture. And stager's like, no, take that picture down.
Yeah.
She's like, okay, but this is my late uncle, and I loved him very much. Like, we need to keep this picture up. She's like, that picture needs to come down if you want to sell this house for as much as possible.
Yeah.
And my buddy was like, I'm out. So
Yeah.
he just walked out. But people become so attached to things that are meaningful to them.
Right.
And it's like, no one cares about that.
Right.
You know, like, I care about this woman's uncle. I don't know him, but I'm sure he was a lovely man. But, you know, it's like people looking at a business,
Yeah.
like, that's not something that's going to make the business money. And you have to, like you're saying, you have to look at it that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Listen, it's been an hour and 10 minutes. That's what it says anyway.
Nice.
I have to let you go.
Okay.
What were you saying?
I was going to say that for people listening, we'll do a free first month of property management fees. We'll waive the fees.
Look at
For the
you.
first year. If people
Look at
wanna
you. What a
listen
guy.
And sign up with us. Yeah. Key Renter Property Management in Boise. We pick up the phone first. It's like all.
Do you have the speech lined up? I know you have this. Come on.
No, I don't.
Pick
I
up
don't.
the phone first.
Honestly, it's one of those things where I'm so good at answering my phone. I'm emergency contact for 8 of my friends and 2 of our owners.
Oh my God.
No
look
joke.
at you. Look at you.
So that's the biggest thing, you know. Customer
awesome.
service. We answer
Yeah.
the phone when you need it.
Yeah, and look, this is not a commercial, right?
Right,
But one thing that's really important is, especially when dealing with management, just like dealing with tenants, personal relationship is the thing that matters the most,
100%.
right? So if you're in a situation where you're dealing with somebody who you can't do business with effectively, or for whatever reason you have hard time, it's not going to work out.
Right.
Right. If somebody doesn't see the value in your perspective on things, then it's going to be really tough for them.
Totally.
So again, I mean, I think anybody listening to this still has gotten a good idea of kind of like what your jam is.
Yeah.
And man, coming from areas like San Jose and whatnot, like, you're dealing with a much different market, which
Yeah.
is so much more, like you were saying, owner friendly.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's not like tenants don't get good houses. It's just,
Right.
you know, there's not as much. It's so litigious down there. It's just so angry and cranky.
Yeah. I mean, people sit in traffic for 2-3 hours a day. I used to do it. I don't know how you could be happy and do that, you know? I'm a better parent here because of it, too, as being a happier person.
Well, I think that's a different conversation. I think
Yeah,
I'm like an
that's the
infinitely
next-
better person
yeah,
here.
yeah,
That's the next
totally.
one. Anyway, thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Quick shout out to our sponsor, C Squared Social. C Squared Social is the leading expert in social media marketing and creative marketing. They have fantastic platforms. I have been a client of theirs for some time. I cannot recommend them highly enough. C Squared Social for all of your social media and creative marketing needs.
Okay.